Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. On this episode, I sat down with Will Enochs, and he is a white hat hacker. So he is on the side of the good guys and goes in and tinkers around in the computers for corporations and such and finds their vulnerabilities so that they can be protected against other groups who are maybe not so nice. That's the most simplistic way I could have put that, I suppose. I am running behind this week. I'm so sorry. So this episode is posting late on this Monday. But here it is nonetheless. You guys know all the usual stuff. Social media, Hey Human Podcast. You can email me, Susan at Hey Human Podcast. If you shop on Amazon, please go to the heyhumanpodcast.com website, and at the top of the page, on the homepage there, is the Amazon affiliate link. If you click on that and do your shopping as normal, it helps support Hey Human, which would be fantastico. Please rate and review Hey Human on iTunes, and also don't forget to check out links on the link page on Hey Human Podcast and .com, and especially for this episode because Will talks about ways to protect yourself and your computer, and there's just interesting information on the links page, so check that out. Okay, nothing else from me. Here it is, episode 88 with Will Enochs. Thanks, everybody. Will Enochs, welcome to Hey Human Podcast.
It's good to be here.
Thanks for being on the show. You are a certified ethical hacker. Is that a correct terminology?
Yeah. I mean, I guess.
You're a white lighter?
Right. White hat, ethical hacker, security consultant. Just kind of,
Yeah.
Who really even knows?
Not me. That's
what
why I'm here to ask you, because I don't know anything about it much other than. So I did a little research, as one is want to do, and it's. 2016 data breaches increased by 40%. That seems like a giant leap.
Yeah.
And then I scrolled down this. I was like, oh my gosh. So Xbox, Intercontinental, Arby's, River City Media, Veriforce, Dun & Bradstreet, I don't even know what that is, Saks Fifth Avenue, UNC Healthcare, America's JobLink, the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, FAFSA, Chipotle, Gmail, DocuSign, Kmart, Brooks Brothers, Verizon, Whole Foods, Equifax, which everyone knows about, Washington State University, Blue Cross Blue Shield. My God, all those places got hacked.
Uber just reported yesterday.
Yeah, and then Uber gets added to the list.
Which, I guess it happened in 2015 or 16, but they didn't tell anybody.
Okay, so now here's
Surprise.
how can they get away with not telling anybody that? How is that legal?
Well, I mean...
Or is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really.
Okay.
I mean, it depends, right? It's all... Some of it's state-specific.
Yeah.
In terms of...
What they're allowed to...
Yeah, I mean, states have... I mean, there's specific regulations, right? Like if you're a bank,
Yeah.
your FFIC, your FDIC, if you're medical, your HIPAA. But, and then there's also state, breach laws. Like Tennessee has its own set of, if you have X amount of information on people and there's... a compromise of their data, or somehow it gets leaked, right? It might not be a hacker. It might just be somebody leaves a laptop on some bleachers somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
And it has a bunch of information on it, right?
Sure.
But each state kind of has its own laws for releasing that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But they obviously should have. They should have reported it. It's a big deal that...
It's a major big deal. But as is for all of these companies that seem to wait a while before they get the word out.
Mm-hmm.
Or sell stock.
Everybody, I mean, you would like to... Obviously, people would prefer it not to get out.
Sure.
They would like to rather deal with it, right? But I think there's a big push for transparency.
Mm-hmm.
What gives, if you're my healthcare provider, what gives you the right to tell someone else my social security number without me knowing about it?
Sure.
Unless it's stated and you don't have the authority to do what you want with my information.
Yeah.
Right, so.
It is pretty sketchy.
Yeah, there's a big push. There's been progress made. It's funny that breaches and ransomware and things like that have done way more for actual data security in the last year or two than all the regulations have and 20 years before that.
Ransomware is the thing where something on your computer takes over your computer, and then they say you have to pay us XYZ and we'll release.
Yeah.
I assume they prey more on companies than on individual citizens for that, or just depends?
No, not really. It's just, they're... most people, they're just trying to make $1. It's all about the money. They're not really trying to distinguish.
They don't even care what the information is, I suppose.
No. Not usually, because they would rather just someone else value it and pay them. And,
So should people... Okay, before I dig into
there's a lot. There's a lot there.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. So you found as a young person that you had an aptitude for computers, and then did you hack into something and someone came along and said, hey, you shouldn't do that, but here's this job? I mean, how does that work when you know that you have this talent for things that could be nefarious, and then decide not to use it for evil, but to use it for good? Yeah,
well, I mean, I think it just starts with, at a fundamental level, like you boil it all down, it's just curiosity. Right? How does that work? And, someone who's interested in computers, it might manifest itself in another way than someone who's interested in something else, art, But, so I grew up with computers around because my dad owned some radio stations, and so we had stuff like that. So I was tinkering on computers at a pretty young age, and got into some like first-person shooter computer games, like Counter-Strike, namely, in like middle school and high school. And so that being in those circles, people like build their own computers so they can play games, and so I did that, and so that's kind of got a job working for a small computer consulting company in high school, and so it kind of started there, and then kind of slowly kind of morphed, Were
you tempted to do bad things?
No, I mean, not really, bad things, but
not like war games where you hack into the
right. Well, I mean, there was, you talk about movies, like obviously one of the movies of the 90s was that movie Hackers, right? That had Angelina Jolie in it and Matthew Lillard, and and that was kind of I love that movie when I was a young kid, right? Because it's computer-esque, even though it's nothing close to reality, like what computer hacking is in reality. It's more about the philosophy, right?
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, that's definitely probably played a part in me eventually making my way onto the security side of it. But before I did just focus on security, it was all infrastructure, network design, so just like all the computer systems that run any day-to-day business. Switches and servers and places to store your files so that everybody can access them, and firewalls, and security is a piece there.
Is coding a computer? I mean, it's mathematics, zeros and ones, right? I don't know a lot about it, but given that it has a language, I know there are several different languages within the computer speak, but how is it that there are people that are able to develop something to lock someone out when it's just still using zeros and ones? How are they coming up with a new way to write the code to make your job more difficult?
Well, like, are you like specifically about ransomware? Like
sure,
that as an example?
Yeah, that's an example, I suppose.
Well, with ransomware being an example, it pretty much just leverages the fact that that strong encryption exists, right? That you can, take a file and encrypt it, which is essentially, like you said, just a mathematical function or an algorithm that you apply to it that essentially makes it unreadable, essentially locks it. And you have to have a key to unlock it, right? And so because we have strong encryption these days, if someone gains access to certain files and encrypts them with their own key, then no one can access them unless they get the key, right? And that's essentially how ransomware works, just like you would think of you holding a physical person or item ransom and putting them behind a locked door in a locked building that only you have the key to.
Right. So cryptography, that's just, there's no way to really break through it.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of different levels, right? There's a level of cryptography that you might be safe from your average Joe, and then there's probably a different level of cryptography that it would take to be safe from like the NSA, right? If they actually wanted to, because they have lots of computing power and resources,
Sure.
and not the typical person isn't going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to
protect themselves.
right
Or
to break into a set of information
right.
That your normal person would. But the government, if they deem it valuable enough, they can put substantial resources there.
Well,
but even so,
data is super valuable, correct? Everything, what we buy, where we go, what we do, what we think, what we surf for, the porn we like, all the stuff, that's all valuable to someone somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's now that's a commodity that's sold, right?
Yeah.
But in sort of an underworldy type of way.
Well, yeah, and not even just.
I know
there is
not
that.
even. Yeah,
there is
two
that.
different
And there's a
levels.
huge, market for those types of things. But even, like I was just reading the other day about companies like Facebook and other shopping sites that, whether it's in browser or a part of, Facebook's application, that they scrape text on posts that you never submit.
How do you mean?
Right. So, like, say you get mad and you type up this tirade on Facebook, and then you decide to sleep on it and get up and be like, probably not good for me to post that. So it never actually goes to the public.
Yeah.
Right? But they still have a way of storing that.
Holy moly, really?
Yeah. And the same thing with websites. Like if you go through, so analytics companies that try to help people determine, like, say you were checking out on the website, but you abandoned your cart. You didn't finish the checkout process.
Mm-hmm.
People want to know why. Why didn't you finish the checkout process? Because they're wanting to fix whatever it is that was that bottleneck between you and the purchase.
Makes sense.
So there's companies that exist around those types of analytics and that type of data. But some of the ways that it's collected is, if people knew how it was being collected, they would probably say, yeah, it's pretty intrusive on my privacy, right? Because and kind of it comes full circle when these companies collect this data, but they do it insecurely, to where they scrape the data, but it doesn't get sanitized. So your full credit card information or your full social security number that you type in one form actually gets taken and stored somewhere and then transferred somewhere else in an insecure fashion, even though maybe the checkout on the website that you were originally putting it into was secure.
Well, that's terrifying.
So there's all these things, right? Yeah.
But what is the likelihood? I mean, I know that people get hacked, their information gets hacked. It's happened to my mom because she's, she clicks on. I'm like, Mom, stop clicking on things, or you don't know where they come from, But what is the likelihood of somebody having their identity, of it getting that far? I mean, I think about that with the Equifax breach. I was one of the people that was breached.
Yeah.
So 1 in 3 Americans. It was pretty much, or maybe even higher at this point.
Yeah, because not counting kids. If you take the kids who probably don't have that, they're not doing credit checks on
children.
Kids.
Yeah, but they have their information.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you know percentages of bad people getting a hold of that, taking on new identities, things like this?
Well, I mean, it's most of the criminals out there that are in this business. They're purely about money, dollar revenue generation. They don't actually want your information.
They're not trying to become you or anything.
Yeah, not unless they can leverage it to get money.
Right.
And like credit card companies have done well over the years in becoming very effective at recognizing unauthorized transactions, and the price of a credit card, like a stolen credit card number, is nil. These days, it's only worth getting them if you can buy them by the thousands.
Because they'll get shut down.
Such
fast.
a short time shelf life, because people. That's why ransomware has seen such a big spike, because
everybody wants to be on their computer.
Yeah, and you don't actually have to. The information's not valuable to them. The money is, but the information is valuable to you.
Makes sense.
All your pictures of your family and your kids and your pets and
your screenplays and your
all the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. They can't monetize that. They don't want to take your screenplay on a large scale.
Yeah,
they don't want to take your screenplay and try to go peddle it. Right? They want your screenplay to be worth a lot of money to you, and they would rather you just pay them $200.
Right.
And if they can get millions of people to pay them $200,
they're doing well.
They're doing well, and they don't even have to like value the data. It's just an automated process. And so that's why ransomware has exploded so, because they just price it under what it would cost to restore from backup or to do things like that.
Yeah.
And just they're smart business people. They're just doing it down this road.
Makes sense.
So it's
economically it makes sense.
Yeah.
How do people protect themselves from something like ransomware other than don't click on? But anymore, I imagine if breaches are happening in these major companies, let's say I go to Brooks Brothers don't sue me, Brooks Brothers, for this example, but I go to Brooks Brothers online to buy a hat or something, and I click on that. Is there something possible that can be breached since those things happen, and then the bad guys are like, she bought the one hat that is the hat that's going to shut down her computer, or it doesn't work like that?
No, not really. So I mean, there's a few different things kind of at play. If you've ever noticed when you go to a website, it says HTTPS, and sometimes it has a green lock, but it doesn't always have a green lock. But that's kind of like the S stands for secure, right? And without getting too technical, that just essentially means that you have a secure connection between your computer and whatever it says in the address bar. Now it's on you to make sure that you're at the real Brooks Brothers site and not just a site that looks like Brooks Brothers, that's Brooks Brothers with an extra O or something like that, right? But if you have a lock there, or it's HTTPS, and to oversimplify, and it's the URL or the web address that you're actually wanting to be at, then you have a secure connection. And most likely there's no one going to be like intercepting that traffic or that conversation. There's always exceptions to the rule depending on where you're at and what network you're on. There's always exceptions, right? But generally, that's the general kind of that's generally true.
So since you since you do this as a means of helping companies, you are paid to hack into systems to find their weaknesses, correct? And then you can report back and help them establish a better security force field.
Right, yeah.
So who's to say there isn't some companies out there that are hacking into the systems just so that they can turn around and say, if we got a deal for you, we know you got hacked because we hacked you. I mean, that must happen too? Or is that only in the movies? I know I have
no, I mean, it's actually, I mean, if you look at things like some of the big public hacks, like the Sony hack and stuff like that, that was largely targeted at stealing intellectual property, right? And there's a lot of state-sponsored things like that, or things that happen from a competitive point of view in business. Of somebody has this proprietary information, the recipe for Coca-Cola, or something like that. It's this business's secret sauce, and it would greatly benefit another business or a competitor to have that information. And there's plenty of attacks that happen on that front, right? Not just kind of the general kind of ransomware. I don't want to say like petty criminals, but there's more sophisticated, targeted attacks, going on too. And then there's obviously, I mean, you can't talk about that without saying like, well, all the Russia stuff, like all the election interference and all the, all those things are examples of very targeted attacks to, I won't speculate on why, but it wasn't just to make a dollar.
Yeah.
Right. It
What's
wasn't financially
fascinating
motivated.
to me about that is with the Facebook interwoven within the hack, they're not just hacking information, but they're actually putting information out there, and that's a form of hacking of this sort of dog and pony show that takes place by ads or bots that are creating content that are in their own way. That's a form of hacking.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you can It's a bunch of things. Like on one side, you could call it like propaganda, right?
Yeah.
But on the other side, you could call it a form of like social engineering, right? They're trying to create a credible story that can be that either motivates people to some type of action based on a result that they want, which is essentially what like a phishing email does.
It's what advertisers do on television.
Yeah.
There's really not that much of a difference as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, there's really not. And in most cases, both parties are looking to monetize it. Just some are doing it legally and some are doing it illegally. But it's a lot, it's not wholly different than, like you said, lots of things that happen.
Right.
In terms of business practices. People are thinking the same way. People are wanting to be efficient. People are wanting to get the most amount of profit for their effort. They're running all the same numbers that businesses are, and in the same way, a lot of good defensive security is increasing the cost of attackers to target you.
How do you mean?
Well, so some of that could be like having better security measures, but on a large scale, you see a lot of things like if you keep your systems up to date, right? Some like exploit that's out there that gives people access to your computer. It doesn't work for very long.
You're talking about virus protection or updates that you get the constant updates on your computers and things saying do this, do that. How does one know that they're from the actual person that, like when I have a Mac?
Yeah.
So every other day, update your Office or update your whatever it is because there's a breach or there's a hole or we have to fix something. How do people know that that's actually coming from who it says it's coming from?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and as with everything in IT and IT security, the answer can be nuanced. But from a general perspective, if it's for operating system updates, if it's coming through the App Store, right, then it uses a set of certificates or signatures to verify on both sides that, you are who you say you are.
Right.
But, there are plenty of, nefarious applications that would try to tell you that your computer has a virus or install these updates. Classic example of such things are like Flash Player updates. There's a huge, if you remember Adobe Flash Player, it's kind of on its way out now, which is good because it was such the target of exploits, and because it had a lot of bugs in it. But you would see a pop-up, right, that was like, you have a Flash Player update, and people would click it, and they would initiate the beginning of the end for their computer. But
gosh, I'm thinking like how many times I've clicked on something like that. Oh my gosh.
But there's things. It's hard to tell everybody these are the things you look for because
it's always different.
It's kind of nuanced, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the goal is to make these things look as similar as the real thing as possible.
Sure.
But both the operating systems like Microsoft Windows and say Apple OS X, and there's the whole Linux community too. But everybody's gotten better about making things more secure. So things have definitely been linear in terms of better updates. The exploits or problems that exist, they have a lot shorter time between when they surface and when they're patched.
Unless the companies don't tell us that they've happened, and then
yeah, well, it's that things are becoming more transparent, which kind of helps deal with that.
Sure.
I mean, you never really know
if
you're not on the inside.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up certificates, and I can't even tell you how many times over the years I've gone, what the hell is a certificate? When you open up something that says warning, this certificate has not been authenticated. What? Yeah. What is this? What does this mean? I don't think a lot of people know what that means, and most people just say, we don't care, and they keep going. But what is that?
Yeah, I mean that's the mechanism by which your computer verifies you're talking to who you think you are, right? It's almost like an ID badge of sorts, and it's generally, frowned upon to click past those warnings because that could be indicative of someone. It's what's called man in the middle in your connection, right? So, because if you go to, google.com and you get your little lock, HTTPS, and you click on it and you look at the certificate, that certificate should be issued to google.com. Their name is going to be on that certificate, and that kind of proves that there's a match there. So a lot of times those mismatches happen when the certificate that you're given doesn't match the name that's actually on the website. So there's a disparity between the two, and your browser's saying like, hey, you think you're going to this website, but this is not what their badge says.
It says it's owned by a guy named Bob.
Right, yeah, in New Hampshire, right?
Oh, that's so interesting.
So there's that whole thing, but sometimes it's okay, because we could get into a long conversation about why your computer and browser actually trust the certificate that it does get, and there's a whole system of how those things, certain companies are certificate authorities that have trust and they can issue certificates, and so browsers trust those certificate authorities, and things are like chained together. It's like just like a chain of trust.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
sure.
I trust what you said because I know, we're friends with the same guy and he wouldn't lie to me.
Sure.
And so it's like this kind of chain of trust, essentially the same thing happens with, a certificate trust.
Yeah. So interesting.
In that chain. But the general guidance is don't click past those.
Yeah.
Or if you are going to click past those, then you can click on the certificate and view it. It's different depending on the browser.
Yeah.
And you can see the certificate and there'll be a name on it.
Yeah.
And make sure that the name is the same as the place you're going to.
But can a bad guy put any name they want to on it if they want to? Ideally?
Well, they can't put any name they want to on it.
Oh.
Because you have to, if it's a trusted certificate, i.e. issued from one of those certificate authorities, and I go and say, hey, I want a certificate that says google.com on it. They're going to say, okay, well, prove that you own google.com. And I can't do that.
Right.
But I could maybe Google probably owns all these, but I could, maybe get a certificate for google.com with 2 L's.
Right.
And maybe I actually own that domain.
Right.
Right. And then I could clone Google's site and create my own site that looks like Google, and then try to get someone to go there, and the certificate would match because it's actually the certificate for the real site, but it's not the actual website. It's a fake.
Do you remember a bunch of years back, I think it was actually Google that let their domain lapse for a hot minute, and a guy bought it?
Yeah, there's an ex-employee from Google, so he kind of knew. He kind of had his eye on it. But yeah, that type of stuff, there can be administrative oversights, and that type of thing can happen.
Sure.
Especially when you're a company like Google, and who knows how many domains they own.
Yeah.
It's not just like you had one domain that you had to, and this was your one job.
Yeah.
It's like they own so many.
One job.
Who knows? Who knows how many?
We can't have nice things.
Yeah. So it becomes an issue. Both the renewal of those domains and the renewal of those certificates.
Right.
Because
it's a big pile of things to keep
track of. It can
be
separate. And there's ways to automate them and stuff like that, but it can become a problem, especially with small businesses that, somebody else set it up at one point in time. It's not somebody's full-time job to manage it. And so
things slip through the cracks.
Yeah. Whether that's updates or all kinds of stuff. So.
Well, and it used to be, I know that PCs were much more easily hacked than Macs. They said, there are no viruses for Macs. Nobody cares about Macs. And now, of course, Mac is a huge industry, and that rule of thumb is no longer. Do you, in your research and line of work, do you find that it's getting neck and neck, or is it still PC has got the dominant virus issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's still, on the whole, Microsoft Windows systems are still at more risk, but it's largely because they're still the dominant operating system in the marketplace.
So it's just smart business for the bad guy.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna spend your time, are you gonna market to the really, really small subset, or are you gonna market to the big subset?
Right.
It's like you want the most bang for your buck.
Sure.
So if you're gonna, develop this thing that breaks into a computer, you would rather it break into 1 million computers than 100 computers.
That makes sense.
And so that's the biggest reason why, Windows has had more problems, and they still largely run the enterprise. There's like creatives and education that, there might be a majority of Macs there.
Mm-hmm. But they know creatives have no money, so.
That's right. That's right. But a lot of times there's even still an intermingling of, I might have a Mac, but, Apple doesn't make enterprise hardware anymore. There was a time where they made like Xserves and stuff like that, but now, so even if I have an Apple MacBook Pro as my personal computer, if I'm in a business context and I'm accessing company resources, it's most likely going to be on a Windows or a Linux server. But it's not going to be running OS X, which is what Macs run, because they don't make enterprise hardware like that.
So what are the best virus protections now for the average bear on either a Mac and or a PC of your recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, it's better to have antivirus that's up to date for sure than it is to not have it. Mm-hmm. But the whoever the leader is kind of changes. It's kind of a moving target. It's also not something you want to put all your eggs in one basket. The stuff we bypass antivirus all the time.
Oh, you mean you can hack right through it?
Right. Yeah, you can create. I mean, once again, it's always nuanced, but historically, endpoint or computer antivirus has worked based on signatures, right? So you have this engine, this database, and you take this bad stuff and you say, this is what the bad stuff looks like. If you see it, alert on it, right? So if it sees it, it can alert on it. But if it hasn't seen it before, if it doesn't match a signature that already exists within its database, then it can't alert on it. So that's multiple problems, right? Because something that's never been seen before,
sure, it's
not going to alert on yet.
Yeah, and hackers are a lot like, let's say, arsonists or something. They leave signatures, right? Or bombers. They have a signature bomb they use, or a signature way to start a fire. Or hackers have a signature too. Sometimes,
but a lot of times, if you take, and more what I'm talking about with the antivirus thing, but I'll address that question as well. Is if you take a picture and you create a hash of it, right, which is just a numeric value. And compare it to another hash of that same picture, the numbers are going to match. But if you change some stuff in that picture and alter the data, then the hash is going to be different because it's just a calculation of that picture. So essentially, like historical antivirus, things are changing a little bit now, just use those signatures. So, if I used some, malicious payload or virus and, it worked, but now they created a signature for it, so now it doesn't work anymore. So I'll go over here and I'll just change one thing, and now the signature's different.
It's like the way a bug when you have the flu works. Then.
Yeah, it's just like a cat and mouse type thing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you can identify this now.
Yeah.
Well, now I'll change this so it doesn't match your profile anymore.
Yeah.
And then so there's that kind of that cat and mouse game as well. But in regards to like different hacker groups, a lot of times, that's what they call attribution, right? They're just trying when something happens, say like the DNC hacks, right? They're going through all these exercises to try to attribute like who did this, and they largely think that it was Russia that did it, and they have certain indicators that makes them think that it is Russia based on a bunch of different things. Some of that's IP addresses, correlating this information with that information, but then also like certain tooling right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you spend all your time developing a set of tools to do a job, what you don't want to do is completely redo your tooling for each new job.
That makes sense.
Right?
Sure.
And so a lot of times how they attribute those types of attacks is the similar tooling that's used.
Yeah.
Once it's detected and they start digging in, they start, ripping the code apart and the things that, the badness that was happening, they can sometimes see commonalities that was like, oh, a part of this was similar to a part of this. And, they start to
that makes sense.
draw lines,
Sure.
whiteboards and pieces of string and those types of things, just like you would see in the CIA movies.
Yeah, trying to find the killer. It's really interesting. You speak of the hacker groups, and that was something I wanted to talk about is Anonymous, for example, one of the most famous hacker groups. What do you think about stuff like that? Is that those... under the assumption that Anonymous is trying to do right by the common man, must be more than one guy or girl, not to be sexist.
It's definitely a collective, and it's kind of, you've seen like groups like that who would call themselves hacktivist, right? That they're not after one specific thing. They have like a social, political agenda.
Right.
But a lot of those things started like when, Anonymous kind of first came on the scene. A lot of those groups, one of their mottos was just like, they would do things for the lulz, right? That they would just for kicks.
Yeah.
They would do something that was funny.
Yeah.
They would deface a site, especially maybe a site or an organization that they disagreed with or maybe had been associated with marginalizing a certain group, and they would deface it just to do it, not to try to like...
Just to show they can.
Right,
and be, merry mischief makers.
Yeah, and just be trolls, and just to do it. But, you see things now where they've started to align themselves with more of a political agenda, and it kind of, but when you have a group of people and different people are doing different things all under the same umbrella, you don't really have a consistent
message.
Yeah, consistent message and a consistent manifestation of their work. It kind of changes.
And if they're from I assume Anonymous is all over the world, that the collective is probably all over the world. It's got to be much more harder to break into that, figure out who it is.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard not to get behind people that are trying to do right by the world too. But again, like you say, sometimes that agenda crosses into different territories.
Yeah.
Of not necessarily being for the common good, but for the good of whatever the hive mind at the time thinks. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously the next logical question is who decides what is good or what is worthwhile, and then and if it is, is it, do you fight fire with fire?
Right.
So obviously you can get into some moral and philosophical
that's why I think
dilemmas there.
Shows like Mr. Robot and Black Mirror and all those shows are so interesting because they do dig beneath the rudimentary concepts and get into the philosophical concepts.
Yeah.
It's certainly a big question.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, the bots that everybody talks about, like the trolls, you mentioned trolls, especially on Twitter and things like that. Those are all just little viruses that are those actual people?
There's a lot of them that are just bot accounts, right, that people have.
And a bot is what?
Usually it's just created. Obviously, a person wrote a bot, right?
Wrote the code.
Yep, and so that it will, post certain things at certain times, and you can. Some of it is just to follow, right? They'll use bots just as a monitoring tool, not to actually get a message out, but just to be able to monitor. Because sometimes, based on privacy settings and things like that, you might not be able to see everything that Donald Trump tweets about unless you're his friend on Facebook or unless you follow him on Twitter or stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes
I follow him on MySpace.
Right, yeah. And Friendster. And,
oh my God, I remember Friendster.
And all those. Poor Friendster.
Aww.
But yeah, so a lot of those things, it's purely for collective purposes. People create bots to join Facebook groups because they want to be able to scrape and aggregate that information.
Yeah.
Right. They don't actually want to participate. But then there's also the participatory bots as well. Like the most recent one I saw is someone wrote a bot that would respond to spammers. So like if you're getting a spam email, you forward the spam email over to this email address, and it's a bot, and the bot itself will start having a conversation with the spammer, with the goal of just like
interesting
sucking up all their time.
The Nigerian prince.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they just have all these, they have some logic in there and also some canned responses to where it'll carry on this conversation.
Right.
The person responds, it'll respond back. The person responds, and it does this indefinitely.
Wow. And
it's kind of, just for fun.
Yeah.
But it's kind of novel.
Yeah.
But it's also with the goal of, hey, it's like, if we can just take up more of these spammers' time, it means less time they have to be emailing other people.
Right. Somewhere out there is the real Nigerian prince who's like, why won't anyone answer my email? I have all this money.
That's what Michael Scott said, right? If a Nigerian prince calls you and wants to give you money, you have to respond.
You never know.
That's right.
Oh man. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what goes through a hacker's mind. Ideally, it's just about the quick gain. And I know that you gave a lecture.
Well, I think it's to some degree important to make the distinction between, a hacker, right? Which a hacker's not a negative term.
Because you're a hacker.
Right. And it's just someone. It's essentially just someone who likes to tinker with things. I mean, a common thing now is like biohacking and life hacking and stuff like that. It's essentially just someone who likes to tinker with things to try to get a better result, or maybe to use things in a way that they were not intended to be used. It's kind of like the general. That's just what a hacker is. And so, but I think socially that it's become like hackers are bad people. Right, and there's been a connotation surrounding that, but I don't think it's definitely not necessarily the case.
Do you in your spare time, do you ever try and suss out who maybe some of the people in Anonymous are? I mean, is that something that a hacker would do? Is try and figure out who some of these other hacker groups are? Or is there a code that you just don't go messing around?
Well, I mean, no, it just kind of depends. I mean, I mainly do consulting type engagements with other companies. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily have to defend a lot of against a lot of attacks from like other groups, but like companies, like large companies who might come under targeted attacks, they keep track of all the different hacker groups, and who's a member of them and what they're doing, and because there's a lot of them,
Sure.
Cult of the Dead Cow, and there's a bunch of them.
I don't know what that is.
There's lots of them.
Yeah.
APT 29, and all the Russian, the Fancy Bear, and there's a bunch of like hacker groups out there that big companies and people in the intelligence community try to keep track of. They want to keep tabs on. They want to know who people are.
And there's the dark web too, right? Which I assume has some pretty intense hacking situations going on in there.
Yeah, but all the way, it's from digital mischief all the way to selling money and drugs and people and all all, because I mean essentially
you're talking about the dark web.
Yeah, they're just wanting to have do something under the cloak of anonymity, right?
Right.
So all kinds of things happen there that are not necessarily have anything to do with computer hacking, other than that's the medium by which they're talking about the things, is using computers.
So for the average bear, not the Russian bear that you were talking about.
Yeah, not the fancy ones.
Not the fancy bears, but the average bears. Is there any type of resource, reading material that they might read that would to make them feel more empowered? I think that a lot of people, just in my everyday experience of having conversations with folks about this type of stuff, people are really scared. They're scared after the Equifax thing. People are very scared that their information is now floating around. What does that mean? What will happen? Can you recommend something to ease people's minds, or is there a good reason to be terrified?
Yeah, I mean, I think it. I don't think there's necessarily a reason to be scared, but I mean, if you think about the internet as a city, and maybe, a metropolitan city, where there's good parts of town, there's bad parts of town, and if you know you're in a bad part of town, it serves you well to know you're in a bad part of town, and you can act different when you're in a bad part of town than you would if you're out in the suburbs, maybe, right? Where you might leave your door unlocked. So some of it is just knowing those types of things, right? And trying to steer clear of the bad parts of town if you can, especially if you don't know how to navigate the bad parts of town, right? So I think it's very analogous to those type of situations that everyone will be, who's ever, been in a city will know about, because every city has better and worse parts of town,
But what good is it to steal all the Equifax? I mean, what are you going to do with, 250 million, 300 million people in America? So, 100 million people were breached or more. What are you going to do with all that info? Sell it off to somebody that is...
Yeah. I mean, everybody's, most of those people are... I mean, there's some people out there that are just doing it,
because they can?
As I say, for the lulz.
Yeah.
They just steal it and then they'll just dump it out on the internet.
Yeah.
But they probably have some agenda, right? Because they might view some company as evil corp or something like that. And, they're wanting to strike back.
Did you get breached in that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's stuff's in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, every adult, every United States adult is probably in there, whether you want it to be or not.
Yeah.
That
doesn't worry you, though.
But it's not the only. I mean, there's a cool website. A guy named Troy Hunt maintains it, called HaveIBeenPwned.com, and it's a website. You put in an email address, and it tells you if that email address has been in any breaches.
Really? Pwned? P-O-N-E-D, I assume?
Yeah, P-W-N-E-D.
P-W-N-E-D. Have I been pwned?
Yeah, have I been pwned.
Okay.
And it's a...
Sounds so dirty.
I know, right? But he's a real, respected guy in the security community. But he maintains like all these data dumps that happen. So when millions and millions of, probably close to 1 billion, Yahoo accounts get leaked, or when MySpace information got leaked, and when LinkedIn information got leaked, and et cetera, Last FM, all the things.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It'll show you if this email address was in this breach. This email address was in this breach.
Wow.
And this breach contained name and email address. This breach contained, usernames and unsalted password hashes. And, so it kind of gives you a little bit of data on what the actual breach contained and if you were affected. So
Sure.
it's a helpful resource.
Yeah.
Because
but
you can know.
Then what? Then you just take a deep breath and say, well, me and 1 billion other people. Or,
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to do other than watch your accounts, be careful, and if somebody tells you that they met someone with your exact same name but looks nothing like you, then maybe that's a red flag. Or...
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that it'll begin to change things for the better. But, for like some of the breaches that included like a username and a password, obviously the first question you should be asking yourself is, aside from changing that password and making sure, was I reusing that password at any other accounts or at any other websites? Because if you are, that's bad news, because you better believe everyone who has a copy of that data is now going around and trying your username or email address and password at a bunch of other websites that everyone uses. And so, but if you're not sharing your passwords across
most people
different
do,
accounts,
though, let's be honest.
Yeah, they do, unfortunately. But stop that.
Okay, that's good advice. So stop that. Yeah. Don't use the same password for all your stuff.
Yeah,
Change
never.
it up.
Use a good password manager. But
what happens if the password manager gets breached?
Well, I mean, there's obviously, people in the biz would say it depends on your threat model, right? Yeah. But on the whole, you're going to be a lot more secure if you use a reputable password manager and just remember one long password or passphrase, and you store all your other passwords in there.
Yeah.
And you can have access to it, through multiple means. All the good ones have a good app for your phone and an application for your computer, et cetera, et cetera.
I have friends that use passwords that are passages from books that they love and all sorts of wacky things. I guess that's pretty smart.
It's better than password 1 as your password, but if it is a really common phrase, then it's not that great, because those will end up in a word list somewhere, because they're super common phrases, right? Like the title of books, the title of songs, hit songs, things that people, sayings, catchphrases, stuff like that.
I am awesome. It's a bad password.
Yeah. But it's better than, the password of password.
Yeah.
But, optimally you want to make them as long and as random as possible.
Yeah.
So if you chose 3 or 4 random words, then that's a lot better, because they're probably never going to end up in a word list like that.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's kind of how passwords, if people have an encrypted version of a password that's hashed, then that's typically how they get cracked or exposed. Because there's at least 2 different versions of complex, right? One is complex in terms of mathematically, like if a computer just tries to brute force it and guess it. But then there's also is it super common? Do you live in Nashville and is your password Nashville? Do you love the Titans and your password is Titans123? Or, so those types of things are going to end up in a word list, and they're just going to hash that password and compare it to yours. Is it the same? Hash this password,
I mean, just to prove that, I can think of at least half a dozen of my close girlfriends who, under suspicion that their then boyfriends were cheating, managed to break into their computers by, in just 20 minutes figuring out their passwords. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's really, it's bad. The fact that people choose
such easy
passwords, because it's really easy to guess. I mean, most engagements that we perform, we're always able to guess passwords.
Really?
To people's corporate accounts.
Interesting.
Always, without fail, because people always use
the same thing.
Yeah, or
or the obvious thing.
Yeah. What is this? Is November 2017. That's someone's password at 80% of companies in the U.S.
Right, because they're told to change their password every month, and so then they just do what's easy.
Yeah. Winter 2017.
Yeah.
That's someone's password everywhere.
Yeah.
And without fail, things like that, things in that family, you can easily guess people's passwords.
And there's programs that can help break through that stuff really quickly too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I imagine it's not too hard to find that.
No, it's really. But the other thing, other than choosing a complex password that you can remember, it doesn't. Like I said, I think the easiest passwords to remember that are still acceptably complex are random words. Table, monitor, ice, Bob. Just choose some. They're not.
Yeah.
They don't make any sense together, but they're just random words.
Right.
And you can. They're easy to remember. They're not 6, 9, underscore, $sign, and then 13 characters of that.
Right. The passwords that come on the routers that make you insane.
Yeah. But those are actually good. That's actually a step forward, because previously, they would just all be the same. They would be admin, username admin, password admin, or username admin and password blank.
Yeah.
And so that's how you get things like botnets. Because if you remember the Mirai botnet that brought down a bunch of websites because they performed a denial of service attack against them and pretty much overloaded them with traffic.
Oh yeah,
so
that's
they
right.
Shut down.
Shut the yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of that is because of routers and cameras and DVRs that have some default set of credentials, so people across the internet are getting access to them.
Well, it's interesting now because a lot of the websites, if you log out and you try to say, oh, if you're changing your password, you used that password 6 months ago, pick a different password. So I guess they're being better about telling people, no, don't go to the old standby, do something new. So that's good. Yeah.
They're doing better. I mean, the other thing, aside from just choosing a better password that's not crazy, simple, and weak, is, turn on multi-factor authentication everywhere.
Yes.
Everywhere.
That means what, you get a text as well? Or?
Yep. There's a bunch of different ways, but it's essentially you have to provide a password in addition to something else.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's like a SMS text. Sometimes there are applications like Google Authenticator or Duo that you can, when you first turn it on, it'll give you like a QR code or something to scan with your phone. And that stores, the secret in your phone so that every time you log in, it asks you for a code, and your phone, generates a code, and you put it in. And that way, if someone knows your password or guesses your password, they can't get in unless they also have your unlocked phone.
Right.
Right, which is...
And your finger to open it.
Right, or whatever, your face, depends, right?
Yeah.
So that's, in most companies and most social media companies and accounts support those things now.
So is it smart to log off of everything and re-log on every time? Or can you leave stuff logged in on your computers? Or? Yeah,
I mean, there's a spectrum, right? It's obviously safer to log out, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's unsafe to stay logged in. Okay. But it mainly depends on your computer.
Sure.
Right? For instance, if I always maintain control of my computer, well, then it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But if everything's all the time logged in and my computer gets compromised, well, then
there's a problem.
Then there's a big problem.
Right.
So it's, once again, it kind of depends on your threat model or how paranoid you are. It would be technically less risky to log out.
Yeah.
But like the go-between is to say like, keep me logged in, but don't remember my password. Because I don't want the password to be stored in the browser. I just want you to issue me a token that's good for a certain amount of time, and then it'll expire. And once it expires, I'll log in again. So, don't remember my password in the browser though.
That always freaks me out when I go to log into something that I thought I was still logged into, and it says, please log in. I think, is this really the site? What's happening right now? Why did they kick me off? I was logged in. But I guess that's why it expires. It's good to know. Yeah,
it's mainly a security measure so that you don't get up. But it's also just computer power has gotten so much better, but classically it was also like a load on their server, disconnect sessions that are no longer in use so that we don't have to support the resources.
That makes sense.
If you never expire any one session and everyone connects and then walks away or leaves it up in their browser or whatever, then you end up with all these sessions, and it kind of grows and grows and grows and sucks your resources, affects the performance of people who are actually wanting to use it in the moment.
Super fascinating.
So,
Will, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I've learned a lot. I'm going to go change all my passwords. Although mine are kind of complicated, but I feel like I use a lot of the same ones. So I shouldn't say that on the air, but now you've heard it. I'm changing them all.
It doesn't matter. Those unique passwords and two-factor authentication are probably the lowest barrier to entry for people that just want to be a little more secure. Because there's really no cost, especially since almost everyone has a smartphone of some sort these days. You already kind of have the ability to turn it on.
Yeah.
And it's worth the added inconvenience.
Is there a password maintaining thing before we sign off that you recommend?
There's some good ones. I mean, I use 1Password, which is like the number 1 in the word password, because I primarily use Apple products.
And that's an app, I assume.
Yeah. But they have a web app, and they have apps for all the stuff, and they support Windows too, but they started as a Mac specific solution.
Yeah.
But there's some good ones. I mean, they all have. Some of them have had problems in the past, but Key Pass is a decent one. You know, I think Dashlane is decent, and LastPass is good, and
so there's a few.
Yeah, there's some good ones. If you just Google the best password manager.
Google with only 2 O's though.
That's right. Stay with the herd. You'll you probably won't go too far off the path.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for helping protect everyone that's listening.
Hey, we do what we can.
Yeah.
One step at a time, baby steps.
Absolutely. Bye, everybody.